Shalom.
Shalom.
Welcome to the practical Parsha for Parshat Veyelech. Veyelech is chapter 31 in the book of Devarim, Deuteronomy. In our books, it's page 538. A few very interesting things about Parshat Veyelech. First of all, the very fact that we have a separate class on Parshat Veyelech is unique. Okay, and why do I say this is unique? Typically, last week's Parsha, Nitzavim, which we spoke about last week, is always read before Rosh Hashanah. Typically is conjoined, it's together with the Parsha Veyelech. When I say typically, I don't mean most of the times, I mean almost all of the time. To the extent that one of the signs, one of what we call simanim, one of the tricks in remembering how many parshiyot there are in the Torah, to remember how many Torah portions there are, is we refer to it as Hashem's garden. Gan, which is Nun, Gimel. Gan, parshiyot Torah. Gan is Gimel Nun, which is 3 and 50, 53. However, if you count up all the parshiyot, what you're actually going to find is that there are 54. So how can we so blatantly say 53? And the answer is because Nitzavim and last week's Parsha and Vayelech, this week's Parsha, are practically one Parsha. Okay? They're so much and so often connected that they're counted as one. Thus, 53. Okay, and that's how we know the Parshiot, we go by 53. In fact, in many places that there are commentary, or people who have what we call drash, homiletic, or homiletics, or speeches, or interesting essays on these Parshiot, they will almost always typically come together and always speak about Rosh Hashanah, because since Nitzavim is prior to Rosh Hashanah, like we spoke last week, always, absolutely, the Shabbat before Rosh Hashanah, so Nitzavim and Vayelech that come together, they'll always be together, and therefore Vayelech will always be before Rosh Hashanah. However, as this week is, the calendar works out very uniquely, that we have a Shabbat between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, which we always do, as I've explained. But then we also have a Shabbat between Yom Kippur and Sukkot. Thus, there is a need to separate these Parshiyot. Okay, they're almost like Siamese twins that have to be separated. Why do we need to separate them? Because remember that we finished the yearly, the annual Torah cycle, the annual reading of the Parshiyot, we completed on Simchat Torah, which is at the end of Sukkot. Okay? So we can't complete it before. That is the completion date. That's the day of celebration. Thus, we need to split up the Parshiyot on Shabbat, every Shabbat, with the exception of the Shabbatot that fall out on a designated holiday, such as Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot. We read, with that exception, only that exception, but except for that, we always read the Parshiyot in the order of the Torah. Thus, there's no other choice but to separate them, okay, as they appear in the Torah. Okay, thus we're going to read and we're going to study Parshat Veyelech. When did this Parsha take place? If you recall, already last week's Parsha, Nitzavim, I said was already on the day of his passing. But here, there is no room for doubt. It's absolutely certain that this was said on the day of Moshe's passing. Let's read inside. Moshe went and he addressed these statements to all of Israel. So remember, when it says all of Israel, it means everyone was gathered together. And he said to them, I am 120 years old today. I cannot any longer go forth or return, for Hashem has said to me, you will not cross this Yarden, you will not cross the Jordan. Hashem, your God, He is crossing before you, He will destroy these nations before you, and you will inherit them. Yehoshua, which is Joshua, his successor, he is crossing before you, as Hashem has stated. So let's go we'll take a look at what's going on here. This is on the 7th of Adar. This, you can mark on the calendar. We know exactly when it was said. And Moshe says, I am 120 years old today. So he's telling them that today, I turned 120. And this is something very, very special. This is something actually unique. And in fact, there's a verse in the book of Psalms that refers to this. And it says over there, Et mispar yamecha amalei. I will fill the number of your days. Quote unquote. This is a reference from Hashem to the tzaddik, to the righteous ones. To the righteous one. And the Talmud tells us that the days of tzaddikim, the days of the righteous, are so exact, and we see it by Moshe, that on the day that he was born is exactly the day that he passed away. Exactly. He lived exactly 120 years.
That's a long life.
What?
That's a long life.
When you put it in perspective, it's a long life. But back then, already in Moshe's time, that was a long life. I want to also add, especially if you consider that Moshe's career as Moshe, as the leader of the Jewish people only began when he was how old? 80. Mm-hmm. So between the time that he was appointed the leader and he left Egypt, it was within the same year, and then 40 years later, here he is. Okay, it's the end. That's it. He's going to be passing away within hours of this parsha. Within hours. Okay? Now, the question really is, on a practical level, what we just said really seems to throw mud in the face of the greatness of every single tzaddik. Because if you look through our history, at least what we know, most tzaddikim, most righteous ones, didn't pass away on the same day that they were born necessarily. You understand? So what does that do? Does that diminish with their greatness? Does that tell us that only Moshe is a great tzaddik? Okay? In fact, in the Chabad dynasty, this is something very unique, very special. We do have a parallel to this which occurred to Moshe. And that is the second Chabad Rebbe passed away on the day of his birthday.
Right.
So he also experienced exactly this which Moshe experienced. So I want to say, if you're a Chabad Chassid, you have an example for it. But certainly all the other Chabad Rebbes, we know their birthdays, we know when they passed away. The day of the passing was very, very well known, and the day of the birth. We don't find this to be the case. This phenomenon seems to be a very rare one, a very unique one. So the Rebbe actually explained it once, and on a practical level, what the Rebbe explained is that it doesn't always necessarily manifest itself in actual physical time. Sometimes, like Hashem used the example by Moshe, we actually get to see it, we get to visualize it, that even the most simplest of people can actually recognize and see, like, wow, this is an exact life. This is a perfect life. This is even so perfect that on the calendar it's picture perfect. It started and ended on the same day. You'd have to remember a birthday, a passing. It's all, that anniversary is unique to this person. However, in the life of a tzaddik, and for that matter, maybe perhaps I can say by extension, the life of any good person, we also get to experience it, but more on a spiritual level. In other words, the person perhaps can speed up or already have accomplished everything they have to accomplish. Thus, what seems to be the discrepancy between the day of their passing, the day of their birth and the day of their passing. Does it make sense? Mm-hmm. Now, let's go to the first verse. Moshe went and he spoke to all the Jewish people. What do we learn from this? What does this tell us? Now remember, Moshe knew that he's going to pass away. Mm-hmm. He knows that his hours are numbered. There's so much we can learn from this, but let's just try to stick to the practical. First of all, what did he speak to them? Words of Torah. So this tells us that even if a person knows that there is only hours left to his life. And for that matter, if somebody's going to engage in a certain endeavor and they have only a short period of time between now and when that event begins, or now when that task begins, somebody's going to work and soon they're going to have to punch the clock and be at work and start to work, and obviously they need to put their mind on it according to the Torah. Because according to the Torah, especially when you're working for someone else, you cannot cheat the person. You can't stand there with a book and read Torah. You need to be totally involved in what you're doing. You have to give it your fullest. Okay, otherwise you're cheating the person, or you're cheating yourself, or you're cheating society. So you cannot do that. That's not consistent with the Torah. So you need to be fully engaged. But right now you have those few minutes. Whether you're riding the subway, whether you're in the car, you can listen to a class. What this is telling us is you have some time on your hands. You have some time left. Utilize it. Utilize it in
It's
a
called
meeting,
time management.
to the ultimate.
Oh, wow,
To
yeah.
the ultimate level. And talking about time management, the best example I can give for this, although when I say the best example, I don't know that us ordinary people are as capable, or even capable at all, of really implementing it. But the Rebbe, the Rebbe didn't speak much about himself. But the Rebbe did tell stories about his father-in-law, the previous Rebbe, and other Rebbes. What times did the Rebbe shared stories? And the Rebbe shared a story where he once walked into his father-in-law's study. And his father-in-law was, if I recall correctly, a short time, maybe an hour, or if not less than that, minutes away from setting out to the Vokzal. Vokzal means the train station, where he was going to take a train from Leningrad, which is Petersburg, Leningrad at the time it was called, to Moscow, which was the capital. And now, understanding the background of the story, having the backdrop, really, really will help illustrate this point. The Rebbe, at the time, this is the previous Rebbe, and this was not a secret, this was known to him, was being pursued actively by the KGB. Okay? He was persona non grata for them. He was actively being sought and looked upon as an enemy of the state, as what they call a counter-revolutionary. He knew that every movement of his, especially when he's traveling, is watched. In Hebrew, there's this expression with 7 eyes, not 4 eyes, 7 eyes. Okay? And he's about to set out on a trip. In any case, most of us, when you set out on a trip an hour before, you're a little nervous. You gotta get there on time. The Rebbe came in and he was there and he was sitting and writing a deep concept in Hasidic philosophy, which requires one's not only attention, but one's full involvement, full absorption into that concept. In other words, on a good day, when someone's not traveling, when someone's not worried about being pursued and watched and so on, also you need to kind of focus really strong. You got to really dedicate yourself. You got to really put yourself into it in order to be able to really be fully engaged. And here his father, the Rebbe, was as if there was nothing else in the world that existed. And he said, so the Rebbe, that he exclaimed, Ad kedei kach, like to such an extent. And we know that Chassidus teaches us to have the mind control the heart, mind over matter, right? But still, to such a level, to such an extent. And the Rebbe answered him, the previous Rebbe answered him and told him, about time management. And there's another end to the story, but I wanted to illustrate that you see that the people that are on a higher level, this is possible. But I'm referring to us ordinary people. Could we implement this at least to some extent? And the answer is absolutely yes. Here Moshe was dying. Here Moshe knows that he's passing away. He knows that his job, his task, his mission in this world is almost over. And here's another thing. Notice, and it wasn't that Moshe wasn't a good person. I'm sure he was a great family man, because Moshe, it says, was mushlam. Mushlam means he was complete. He was a wholesome person. A wholesome person is not only good in spiritual, but also in the material. A wholesome person is not only good outside of the house, but also inside of the house. Otherwise, he's not wholesome. He's not the perfect person. He's good in one thing, in many things, but he's not good in everything. Moshe is a symbol, is an example of that godly person that's perfect in everything. So I'm sure he was a very good family man. Knowing that he's going to pass away in a few hours, go home, kick back on the lazy boy, spend some time with the children, with the grandchildren, right? So, you know what I mean? I mean, say your goodbyes, give them your hugs, your kisses. It's over. You're leaving. You're not going to see each other again in this world. No. What is he engaged in? What is he involved in? Not only studying Torah, but in this case also teaching Torah. Teaching Torah. So this tells us the importance of the study of Torah. Of course, I say this, don't do this without adult supervision. Okay, don't take this literally and, not come home anymore to your families and to help out. There is the importance that, like I just illustrated, the importance that the Torah attributes to studying Torah, but then there is even a greater importance that the Torah attributes to behaving accordingly with the Torah, which is to be
looking for wholesomeness.
Right, to be complete, to be wholesome, to be that perfect person is to help around the house and to be there. However, and this is perhaps the best, what we call the best, what do they call it? The best way to test, the best means of really deciphering if one is when somebody has their own free time. The kitchen's clean, the big children are asleep, you got your own time. Are you spending time looking up the news, or are you spending time, taking out a Torah book, a Torah sefer, and studying some Torah? In this case, I'm certain Moshe already spoken to his family, didn't neglect his family, but look what he did. Look how he's spending his last several hours on earth is by teaching Torah, by studying Torah. But he did say, I can no longer come or go. I can no longer come forth or return. What does it mean he can no longer come forth or return? Was he weak? Was he feeble? Was he aged to the extent that he was too weak? The answer is no. We're going to see later that he actually climbed up a mountain. He had to climb a mountain. He had a bucket list that he ain't good enough. He's going to climb a mountain and see the entirety of the land of Israel. It's not like he was weak. In fact, it says later that even the saliva in his mouth was wet. Not like sometimes an older person that, the mouth is dry, which is usually a telltale sign of illness, right? Of the body shutting down. He was all vibrant, full of vigor, full of energy. And Hashem says that he can't come and go. Hashem took away from him, it says, the well springs of wisdom. Because remember, it was now being transferred to his student, to his disciple Joshua, who's succeeding him, who's going to be the next leader, and the leader means that he's going to be the next, grand teacher of the Jewish people. So Hashem took it away from him. And that's what he meant when he said, I can no longer come and go in discussion of Torah. And yet, what does he do? He no longer had the ability to go into 12, to really jump into the depth of Torah, to dive into it, but he still studied Torah. Look at the love, the special appreciation that he had for Torah. And that's also a very important lesson, because there are times when we're not able to dwell into the depth of study. There are times, there's times when you're traveling, there are times when, there's a lot of noise around, sometimes we're tired, we're fatigued, and things like that. What do? So you study Torah on a more elementary level, on a basic level. Even it says sometimes if a person can't study, cannot focus in their mind, say words of Torah. Just say the words, okay? Say words of Psalms, say the words of Torah. Even to say words of Mishnah or Talmud, which really requires one's understanding, but it's brought down that even that has its value as study of Torah. One can do better. So that's a very, very important lesson. Another thing that really jumped out at me is if you look through the Parsha, you see that there is a recurring theme of not to fear, not to be fearful. In other words, how to approach matters. If you look, for example, verse 6, it says, be courageous and bold, do not fear and do not quake before them. For Hashem your God is He who is going with you, right?
Yeah.
He will not enfeeble you, nor will He abandon you. So you see that in order to have Hashem going with you, what's the prerequisite? What is the correct approach? What is the way to ensure, to guarantee that? Don't be fearful.
Just
Be
do
confident. Go ahead, do it.
Yeah.
Right? And then you see again, now he turns to his disciple. Verse 7, he turns to the disciple. He says to him, don't fear. Right? Be strong. Be courageous and bold. Right? Look in verse 8. Hashem is the one who is going ahead of you. He'll be with you. Again, he will not enfeeble you. Don't be afraid. Don't fear. Don't quake. Again, Moshe has this recurring fear right at the end of his life. And remember, in a way, this is like the mother bird sending the birds out to fly. Moshe knows the sadness that's going to befall them. And sadness, sadly, can also bring with it a sense of hopelessness. Mm-hmm. And therefore Moshe is revving them up, encouraging them. Don't allow yourself to become fearful. Once you allow yourself to become fearful, everything can start to fail. Okay? The moment you lose your hope is when you lost everything. In order to have true hope, not fake hope, but true hope, you have to be staunch in your belief that Hashem is and will take care of you and guide you to where you have to go and what you have to do. And that's what he's doing. That's one very, very recurring. I think that's one interesting theme that jumped out on me that's recurring. Another thing is in verse 10, he says to them, another mitzvah. And this is the mitzvah of the gathering of the people. So far in this Parsha, we've had the actual gathering to which he's speaking to them. Right? It says Moshe spoke to all the Jewish people. That I thought we already spoke about it once. Mm-hmm. That this means that this is an indicator that he gathered all the people together, men, women, and children. And now he speaks to them about gathering. When is this gathering? So this is the Sukkot preceding the sabbatical year. Mm-hmm. Every seventh year was a sabbatical year. Mm-hmm. At the end of the sabbatical year, all the people. When I say all the people, as it says over here, men, look at it, let's read verse 12. Assemble the people, men, the women, the infants, and your convert who's in your towns, in order for them to hear and in order for them to learn, to fear Hashem your God, and they will make sure to fulfill all the statements of this Torah. This is the mitzvah of Hakel. Hakel means to gather the Jewish people. They would all have to gather to Jerusalem. I mean, remember, take a moment. Imagine what Jerusalem was like in a year of gathering, a year of Hakel. Whereas in a regular festival, when I say a regular festival, I mean of the three major festivals, Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot, only the able-bodied men were obligated to do the pilgrimage. And of course, with them, they were also obligated to educate the children, so any boys who are able to travel with their fathers, it says they're able to walk on their own from Jerusalem up the mountain to the Holy Temple. Also, there was a level of obligation to bring them in order to teach them, to encourage them, to educate them. Yes, I'm certain, as we read on the first day of Rosh Hashanah, I'm certain that there were people who also brought their entire families along with them. As we read on Rosh Hashanah, where Elkanah brought his wife Hannah typically. It's just when she had the baby, when she had Samuel, she gave birth, she didn't want to go, she wanted to stay back home with him to help nurture him so he can be ready to go and be a servant of Hashem. But what you see, again, in your imagination, is that Jerusalem, on a given festival, was overcrowded and flooded with people. Imagine what it looked like. Imagine what it meant that all Jewish people from the entire land of Israel convened in Jerusalem and all had to come and hear as the king read from this book, the fifth book of the Torah, for all the people. We're not going to get into the details of all the details of the ceremony, all the steps. But I just wanted, just for a moment, to take this concept of gathering. So far, Moshe gathers all the people. He tells us about gathering all the people. And if you look at the very end of this Parsha, look at verse 28. Oh, I'm sorry, before I continue, look again at verse 23. chapter 31, again he says to Yeshua, be strong, be courageous and strong, right? You see that? Okay? And then look in verse 28, back to what we're talking about. He tells them about, let's gather all together again. So you see this theme of gathering. This is actually a very, very important, a very fundamental theme in Judaism. Let me explain. Truth be said, that most of Judaism, most of the mitzvot, whether it's the positive or the negative commandments, could be and should be and typically are observed in private. It's an individual's obligation. It's a common individual to do his mitzvah and so on. Yet, in other words, if one wants to make the argument, this whole idea of a gathering place, of a synagogue, of a place that people have to congregate together, doesn't even appear in the Torah. It doesn't say anywhere in the Torah you have to pray together in unison. It doesn't say that. Correct? The Talmud speaks about it, but it doesn't say it here. So it would seem, or would make at least for an argument, hey, why is there play such a fundamental role in Judaism? To the extent that we know that a Jew shouldn't move to a place where there isn't a synagogue, there isn't a place to study, right? And if you typically look, it's very interesting. Today, sadly, and I say sadly, unfortunately, one of the key elements, the key reasons for assimilation at the rate that it is because Jews no longer live by this phenomenon, which is, in yesteryear, and I'm talking about, for example, myself, I lived in a place, it was on his way out, I was just there as an intern for a year as a rabbi. A small old mill town in Massachusetts, where the 2 generations ago, they made their fortunes in the mills, but their children didn't come back. There was nothing there for them. You understand? The children became lawyers, doctors, businessmen. They moved elsewhere. Anywhere else in the tri-state area there. In Connecticut, New York, New Jersey, where there was opportunity. So as far as the Jewish community is concerned, it was dying down. And the truth is that most of the people were not religious. Not only talking about the people that were left there, the older generation. Talk about even I spoke to people, I heard from people, this person used to live here, this family used to live there. And I noticed something very interesting. They weren't necessarily, I would say, terribly Shabbos observant. They weren't necessarily very kosher. They weren't necessarily this, but they were Jewish. And you know where they lived? In very close proximity to the synagogue. In the same neighborhood. There were some nicer homes. There were much, much nicer homes. You can see who made money in their day and so on. But the common denominator was they all lived in that area. Even the gentleman that came, I remember, you only show up on your kippur for a few hours. Few hours only. I'm like, hey, stay a little longer. He says, I did my thing for the year. He showed up by car. Okay? But he only lived maybe maximum 8 minutes, 10 minutes maybe. Max. I wouldn't give him more than 10 minutes walking distance from the shore. What is the point that I'm bringing out? This idea of congregating, this idea of getting together, this idea of having a focal place where Jews typically get together for prayer, for gatherings, for celebrations, even, God forbid, in difficult times to pray for salvation or to mourn a loss. These places, it's what galvanized, what kept together communities, what kept Jews together. So that as long as Jews lived in this type of congregation, they lived, even if they didn't go to the shul all the time, but you lived in a Jewish neighborhood, so most of your neighbors were Jewish. So what went up on Hanukkah? Hanukkah menorahs, not Xmas trees. You understand?
Yeah.
What were the influences that the next generation had? What were the influences? Even if the family itself maybe didn't adhere to every detail of the law. But they looked out the window, they saw Jews walking to shul on Shabbos. Okay? They looked out the window, they saw a celebration of Rosh Hashanah. They saw an observance of Yom Kippur. Versus living 15, 20 miles away from the temple. And who are your neighbors? The Joneses. Right? Who are your neighbors? Nothing that even has a resemblance to Judaism. No fault at all. It's just regular people living out in the middle of nowhere. Now, the kid, for sure, even is not likely to even see a Jewish kid, to have a few Jewish friends, because lives and slowly but surely, I shouldn't say slowly but surely, sadly, very quickly but surely, assimilation really, really takes its toll. Mm-hmm. And you can see that this is one of those things that it doesn't even have to be said. Remember, I asked the question, where does it say in the Torah that you have to congregate to pray? Maybe not. You could pray in private, right? You can have a solitary prayer. If a person is at home alone, it doesn't mean, I don't pray because I don't have a minyan, or I don't have a congregation to go to, I don't have a synagogue to go to. That's true. But that's not consistent with Jewish life, and not consistent with the continuity of the Jewish people. Moshe over here is speaking to them about what the future holds, what they should do in the future. What is the two keys he gives them? Be fearless. The future might not always be perfect. It might not always be rosy. But don't allow fear to settle in and hopelessness. And number two, congregate. Because as long as you congregate together, you might have some people that are less perfect, some people that are more perfect, some people on this status, that status, but you are together. There's a group, like you said the word, family. As long as you stick together, you are bound to continue. There's hope. There's a future. The moment you lose that, you start to lose everything. And that, I believe, is the message of this part.
I tell you what, it happened in a very good neighborhood in Miami, Temple Beth Ann. Beautiful shul, beautiful school. The whole neighborhood in the center of Miami, gone. Even the synagogue is closed.
So that's precisely the point I'm making.
And
you see, the very people who built these synagogues, sadly, that's synagogues in the sense of we call a shul. Sadly, they were more of the, let's call it the liberal branch of Judaism. Okay, self-proclaimed liberal branch. It's either Judaism or not. I'm not saying it, but these are people who it's reform, it's conservative. This is what was their message? We don't have to live the old ways. You can still be a good Jew living the new ways. Well, it only works for that long, because remember, the generation that lived in a congregational area, the generation that lived with the old style values, they still have the flavor of Judaism. They still have that flowing in their blood.
Yes.
But their children, certainly their grandchildren, okay, they didn't see it. Why didn't they see it? Because the very rabbis, the very leaders that built those congregations were the ones that said to the people, you don't have to live next door. In fact, I want to tell you this is not my words. When I lived over there in that area, I knew of a doctor. He actually was a young man, younger than my congregants, and he was a cardiologist. That's why he lived there, because he had a good position. He was like, I say, religious, modern Orthodox, very modern Orthodox. But we used to get together and study every week, and he told me himself, he said, he grew up with influences of conservative, he became a little more observant, and he said to me, he says, I can tell you when Judaism started going downhill, at the rate that it is. He says when the conservative movement, he told me in the 50s, they gave out an official ruling, like as if it has some value, official ruling that if you're driving to shul on Shabbos, then it's okay. In other words, you're not allowed to drive on Shabbos, but if it's for the purpose of driving to shul, then it's okay. These are not my words, these are his words. I'm quoting, his name was Dr. Brown. So he told me that's when basically they said, that's where I get this whole idea, by the way, about the gathering. It's not mine, it's his, I don't want to plagiarize. He said, that's when they basically told you as a Jew, you don't have to live amongst Jews, you can live out there in boondocks, but then you'll travel the 15, 20 miles and come to shul. But sometimes it's going to be faster. Instead of walking 15 minutes to shul, you'll drive 10 minutes in a comfortable car. What did that do? Exactly what I said. So you have this beautiful kind of people invested money, they believed in it. Maybe they wanted to be a little more modern, take it a little easy, ease off the pedal a little bit, don't be so rough. Let's make it a little nicer. The old style's a little too harsh, a little too heavy. And But listen, you don't have to live right there, right near the shul with all the noise and, this nicer neighborhoods. We're going to move out to the suburbs. Okay, move out to the suburbs, and then move out a little further, and then you live away. And what happens? Kid grows up. What are his sights? What are her sights? What do they see? They go to school with everybody else, right? The home may not necessarily be as kosher as it should be. Okay, every rule is bent. Every corner is rounded. Okay? What happens then? You look out the window and you see beautiful lights flashing during the winter. This is beautiful stuff. It's nice. Why don't we get there? We have the little miserable menorah, a few candles over there, they go out in a half hour. It starts, at the subconscious level, it starts to give the kid a sense, whoa. That's very nice. That's very nice. And there's nothing wrong with it. We live here. This is part of our neighbors. And indeed, you have to be good with your neighbors. You have to be nice. And you hear it in school. You don't hear it inside the house, but you see it from inside the house. So what? It's all there. It's part of your life. It becomes your life. And then you want to know a generation later, why is there so much assimilation? Why are these big temples closed down? Because there's no one left. First they live 15 miles away, then they live 15 years away, and then they're generations away, and then they're gone. And that, I think, is the message that Moshe was giving right before his passing. And really, everything is included in the Torah. Everything that happens today, everything that happens yesterday, everything that happened tomorrow is included in the Torah, and most specifically, in this last book of the Torah, the whole history of the world is spelled out here, from the time of Moshe to the end of time. And even more specifically, as we inch closer to his actual passing, and then as we will elaborate in next week's Parsha. Anyway, I think we said a lot today. Shalom. I want to use the opportunity to wish everybody a Gmar Chatima Tova. That since whenever you hear this, it's going to be either right before Rosh Hashanah or right before Yom Kippur, if it's a unique year like this one. So it should be a good year, Shana Tova Mituka, good, sweet year. And the reason why we say sweet, I heard, is because good, it's always going to be. It's got to be sweet, because it shouldn't be just good on God's terms, that He understands that it's good.